Hi, my name is Beth. I'm doing a speech today for a report and research paper I did for my abnormal psychology class. It is on Asperger syndrome, which is a form of autism and is now listed in with the autism spectrum disorders. It's the most mild form of autism you can have. They're kind of socially backwards, but they don't need to be in a wheelchair or, anything like that. In 1944, there was a man named Dr. Hans Asperger, and he looked back when he was studying psychology and realized that he'd have some symptoms of what he thought to be this syndrome back when he was younger. He did a study based on himself and studied some boys. I think it was about 40 boys he did a research paper study on, and he wrote a journal of his findings. They all seemed to have a dislike of change. They couldn't really make friends very easily. They had little empathy towards others, and some of them even had some awkward movements. After his research study was done in his paper, there was very little other studies done until 1981. In that year, a British psychiatrist named Lorna Wing decided to pick up the studies on this type of syndrome. She studied several different forms of autism, and along with a colleague, they developed a tool. It was called the Diagnostic Interview for Social Communication Disorders. This tool is called DISCO, and it is still used today. It's a psychological study to try to find symptoms in children. At that point, she gave credit to Dr. Asperger, which was shortly before he passed away. And that's how the syndrome became known as Asperger syndrome. They have found that at first they thought the syndrome was based on all males and there wasn't any females that really developed it, but now they've decided in their research studies that 80% are male and about 20% are girls. This is it's mainly in boys because they're more shy than girls. Girls are a little more outgoing when they're younger. Most of the people with Asperger's have an above average intelligence. They remember things, they have a higher IQ, they're just more socially backwards. We've come to develop the EEG and the functional MRI, and doing testing on people who are presumed to have Asperger's, some show a frontal lobe abnormality, which they didn't find before. Based on this, they have decided that genetics could be a factor. Like if your brother or sister has Asperger's or it runs in your family, you have a higher chance of getting the syndrome. Also, preterm babies that are born before 26 weeks, they have a higher chance of getting it also, maybe due to lack of development in the womb. We definitely know that more research is needed to try to find the causes and the reasons for any type of autism syndrome. People with autism or Asperger's seem to show more anger, they have more anxiety, some have poor coordination. They can sometimes be deemed as a loner, which can lead them to be bullied at school. It can cause depression, which then they would need a drug for depression. Most are an expert in one subject, mainly dealing with numbers. They can remember license plates. They can remember all of their family's phone numbers. They have a high memory level, just are a little backwards in society. The movie Rain Man that came out in 1988 showed a man that had a high degree of autism, which was Dustin Hoffman, and his brother was Tom Cruise in the movie. He was living in a facility, and after their dad passed away, Tom Cruise decided to pick him up and take him around the United States, mainly to Vegas to gamble. They did the best part I remember of this movie was when the toothpicks, they were eating at a restaurant, the toothpick box fell on the floor, and Dustin Hoffman looked at it and said 396, and Tom Cruise looked and there was 4 left in the box out of a box of 400. So then they proceeded to go on to Vegas and did a little card reading and won some money. But like I said, in that movie, it shows shows you a good way of autism, but like I said, it's a much higher form than those with Asperger's. The only way you can really diagnose it is psychological testing, other than the EEG and the functional MRI, which means you can't really go to a doctor. You need to go to a psychologist if you notice anything in a young child. A lot of people think that people with Asperger's are self-centered, because they're loners. They think they just live for themselves and don't pay attention to others, but really they just can't help that. Some say they could be sociopathic and malicious. There's been no studies to prove any of this, that they're going to turn out to be serial killers when they're older or anything like that. Testing and diagnosing at an early age is very vital. If you're a parent and you have a 4 or 5-year-old, especially when they start preschool, kindergarten age, if they have a hard time making friends, they seem a little socially not accepted, and they're kind of, going off to themselves and being alone, now's the time to get the treatment. You can't wait until they're older. Just as with Down syndrome, it's much better to get treated at a young age. Therefore, they can learn to live in society better with their problems. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help them more than anything, more than any drugs. Like I said earlier, if they end up with a depressive state, then they'll need a psychiatric drug, to take care of that. But cognitive behavioral therapy can help them live in society. Family and friends should be involved, and teachers as well when they're in school. There's classes that they can maybe have that helps them deal with life rather than just your math and English and, things like that. Like I said earlier, if you suspect your child has Asperger's or any other form of autism, get them to a doctor at first suspicion. The pediatrician on your yearly visits, they're not really going to notice it unless, if you say, hey, he seems to not be working in school well with others, but he seems really smart, the doctor can recommend a psychiatrist for you to go to. The DSM-5 is the manual for psychiatric studies, and it's still a controversy on whether all of these things such as Asperger should be grouped into the autism spectrum disorders. They're all the same type of disorder, so that's why they grouped them together. But to be diagnosed, they need to have a more way of separating it, because some of them do have a lot lighter form than others.